If you are driving down Route 66 in the dead of night and your headlights catch a young woman in a blue dress shivering on the shoulder, do not stop. Keep your foot on the gas, lock your doors, and whatever you do, don't look back. Because the person you are letting into your car, well, they might already be dead. So have you ever picked up a passenger who literally wasn't breathing? Today we're diving into a genuinely terrifying explainer of a true campfire tale. It's one of those stories that completely shatters everything you think you know about the safety of the open road. We're going to retrace the events of one deeply unsettling night that just flat out defies logic, science, and the basic laws of life and death. The Midnight Route, October 2019, our explainer really kicks off with a guy named Marcus Webb, and it's super important to understand Marcus's background here. He is a hardened, veteran long-haul trucker. We're talking 17 years of experience running heavy freight from Chicago all the way down to Albuquerque. This guy has seen literally everything on the road: deer frozen in the headlights, blinding dust storms, completely unexplained wrecks. He is absolutely not the kind of guy whose imagination gets the better of him, you know? He's totally accustomed to that suffocating, heavy isolation of the night shift.
Now, the timeline here is critical. The incident happens in October 2019, exactly at 2:47 a.m. And Marcus remembers the time perfectly because he had literally just glanced at his dashboard clock, trying to figure out when he could grab his next coffee. He's navigating this massive black void somewhere between Flagstaff, Arizona and Gallup, New Mexico. There were absolutely no other cars out there, no building lights. He is completely and utterly alone. The atmosphere out there that night was just incredibly intense. The source material actually describes the stars overhead looking almost fake, like someone had just spilled salts across black velvet. So as Marcus's twin headlights are slicing through this pitch black desert, they suddenly light up something standing perfectly still on the gravel shoulder, maybe 50 yards ahead. The girl in blue. Unnatural anomalies. Right in the harsh, blinding glare of a Peterbilt rig's high beams, Marcus spots a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, with this long, dark hair just hanging loose around her shoulders. She's got her thumb out in that universal gesture for a ride. But instantly, the context of her appearance is completely wrong. I mean, consider the sheer impossibility of her situation here. She's standing there wearing a light blue summer dress. But the ambient temperature outside, it is 38 degrees Fahrenheit. That is barely above freezing. And she doesn't have a jacket, no bag, not even a cell phone in her hand. She is totally, completely unequipped for survival in the freezing desert night. Now, every veteran trucker knows the golden rule: never pick up hitchhikers. It's a fundamental survival instinct. But, inexplicably feeling compelled by how much danger she seems to be in, Marcus actually hits the air brakes and pulls his massive rig over. He's watching in his side mirror as she approaches the cab, but the source notes a really disturbing detail here. She wasn't walking like a freezing person shivering in the cold. Instead, she was gliding, just moving with this incredibly smooth, unnatural, even rhythm. She climbs up into the cab. She's got pale skin, high cheekbones, and these dark eyes that catch the interior dome light and look almost reflective. Marcus asks if she needs a ride, and she just utters a single, totally flat word: Gallup. But as he looks over at her face, a jolt of pure primal panic hits him. He realizes she is staring straight ahead through the windshield, and she isn't blinking, not even once. The freezing cab, absolute silence. So Marcus pulls back onto the desolate highway, and for the first few miles, they are just driving in this suffocating quiet. She sits there entirely motionless. She doesn't fidget, she doesn't check her nails, she doesn't even glance out the window. Marcus actually cranks up an old Hank Williams song on a Flagstaff country station just to break the horrible tension. But she is completely indifferent, like a literal statue strapped into the passenger seat. Trying his best to normalize this terrifyingly tense environment, Marcus says, "Pretty cold night to be out without a jacket, huh?" Her response was completely flat, totally devoid of any inflection. "I don't feel cold," she says. When he asks if she has family waiting for her in Gallup, her replies come with these bizarre, calculated 3-second pauses. "They're waiting for me," she says, in a tone so dead it made the hairs on Marcus's arms stand straight up. About 20 agonizing minutes into this drive, Marcus checks his instruments. The dashboard gauge clearly shows the cab's interior is a comfortable, heated 71 degrees. The heater vents are blowing warm air steadily into the small space, exactly like they always do on these cold desert runs. But then, the physically impossible happens.
Despite the heater pumping out that 71-degree air, the temperature inside the truck just instantaneously plummets. The drop is so severe, so sudden, that Marcus can actually see his own breath. Little white clouds of vapor are popping into the air every single time he exhales. So he looks over at his passenger in the freezing cab. He's breathing heavily, terrified, and very much alive, white vapor puffing from his mouth. But the young woman in the blue dress, there is absolutely zero vapor coming from her lips. He watches her chest for a full 30 seconds. It is completely still. No rise, no fall. She wasn't breathing at all.
The black eyes, a primal terror. His brain is just refusing to process the horrifying data his eyes are taking in. After 30 seconds of watching her lifeless, motionless torso, Marcus finally manages to whisper a quiet, terrified question. "Hey, you okay?" And in response, she doesn't just turn to look at him normally. She turns her head so slowly, it was like her neck was grinding on mechanical gears.
When she finally locks eyes with him, Marcus feels this bone-deep, primal terror. Looking directly into her pale face, he sees that her eyes are completely black. And I don't mean just dark brown or just dilated pupils. I mean solid black, from edge to edge. It looked like two empty, void-like holes had literally been cut directly into her face. Suddenly, her voice changes. That flat, emotionless tone, gone. "You need to let me out here," she says. The voice is hard, it's forceful, and it's final. It triggers this massive adrenaline dump and an ancient survival instinct in Marcus. Without even thinking, his body just reacts on its own, slamming on the heavy air brakes and grinding this massive rig to a screeching halt right in the middle of nowhere. The truck has barely rolled to a complete stop before she pushes open the heavy passenger door and climbs down. Marcus is trembling. He's watching in a side mirror as the girl in the blue dress walks onto the shoulder, steps off into the desert scrub, and just keeps walking. Within seconds, she is completely swallowed by the pitch-black night, vanishing into the total darkness just beyond the red glow of his taillights. The diner revelation, Route 66 legends. Marcus is shaken to his absolute core. He sits in the idling truck for 10 full minutes before he can even force his shaking hands to grip the steering wheel again. An hour later, he finally rolls into a brightly lit truck stop in Gallup. He's sitting at the diner counter, barely able to hold a pen for his logbook, and he recounts the entire terrifying ordeal to this massive, veteran trucker named Dale Hutchins. Marcus is fully bracing himself for skepticism, right? He expects Dale to laugh at him, but Dale doesn't laugh. He doesn't tell Marcus he's just tired. Instead, Dale sets his fork down and methodically runs through this chilling checklist. Blue dress? Yep. Dark hair? Yep. Doesn't talk much? Eyes that go pure black when she looks at you? Seen around 3 a.m. on cold nights between Flagstaff and Gallup? Dale verifies every single detail, confirming with his grim recognition that tons of other drivers had seen this exact same girl. And this brings us to the absolute shocking twist of our explainer. Dale reveals the dark history of that specific stretch of highway. You see, in October of 2009, exactly 10 years prior to Marcus's encounter, a 23-year-old girl was reported missing. Her car had broken down out there during a brutal October cold snap. 3 days after she went missing, search parties found her body. She had died of exposure out in the freezing desert. Her remains were located 200 yards off the shoulder, near mile marker 141. That is the exact, precise location where Marcus picked her up and dropped her off 10 years later. And when they found her body frozen in the desert scrub, she was wearing a blue summer dress. The trauma of that night was so intense, it actually forced Marcus to take 2 weeks off work. He eventually did return to the wheel because, well, Route 66 is his livelihood, and as the story notes, the highway does not care about your trauma. But he follows a very strict new rule now. He never, ever stops for hitchhikers. He knows now that some isolated figures out there in the freezing dark are already past the point of being helped. So I leave you with this final, provocative thought. If you were ever driving that lonely stretch between Flagstaff and Gallup, way past midnight in October, and your headlights catch a lone figure in a light blue dress shivering on the shoulder, what will you do? Will your humanity force you to hit the brakes, or will you keep your eyes locked on the road ahead? If this chilling explainer kept you on the edge of your seat, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We'll be bringing you a lot more deep dives into the most terrifying, unexplained mysteries out there.
You're driving down a pitch-black highway in the dead of night. Your headlights are literally the only things cutting through the absolute heavy darkness. Your eyes are heavy, your whole body aches from hours behind the wheel, so you pull off the road for a desperate cup of coffee. The diner you step into is brightly lit, completely normal, humming with the quiet energy of a late-night truck stop. You smell the bacon grease, you pay for your food, and you leave. But what happens when you drive back down that exact same stretch of road 2 days later, and not only is the diner gone, but the entire exit has completely vanished from existence?
Look, if you're ever driving west through Nebraska late at night and your headlights catch a sign for exit 191, you need to just keep driving. Honestly, no matter how heavy your eyelids feel or how badly you need to stretch your legs, lock your doors and keep your foot on the gas. Because maybe you're not actually as tired as you think you are, or maybe something out there in the dark is simply waiting for you to stop.
Now, let me introduce you to Ray Callahan. 22 years. That is exactly how long Ray had been a long-haul trucker. I mean, the guy practically lived in the cab of his rig. He'd hauled the whole shebang, everything from frozen beef out of Texas to heavy auto parts from Detroit. In over 2 decades on the road, he had pushed through blinding blizzards, torrential downpours, and suffocating fog. He knew the major highways, the winding interstates, and the forgotten back roads of the U.S. better than he knew his own driveway.
And here's the thing you need to know about Ray. He's a man of asphalt and diesel, not ghosts and shadows. He calculates his fuel efficiency to the decimal, weighs tire pressure, logs his miles with rigid precision, and completely ignores late-night trucker lore. If he sees something, it is physically there. He is a highly practical guy with literally zero superstition. Ray is definitely not someone who gets turned around, and he is for sure not a man who imagines things. He's as grounded as a concrete wall. And honestly, that is exactly why what happened to him out in the cold dark is so deeply unnerving. Because when reality fractures for a guy like Ray, he has absolutely no framework to explain it.
So, let's set the scene. It's November of 2021 on Interstate 80 in Nebraska. Ray was hauling heavy industrial equipment from Omaha straight out to Reno, Nevada. It's a route he had driven dozens of times before, just a straight shot west across the state. Now, if you've never driven across Nebraska in late November, you really have to understand the isolation. It is brutally flat. Once you get away from the faint glow of city lights, it gets oppressively dark. The white dashed lines on the road just become hypnotic. It was just Ray, the endless black void beyond his high beams, and a classic rock playlist humming through the speakers. Everything was perfectly, entirely normal.
The drive started off normally enough. He pulled out of Omaha at 6 p.m., fully planning to push 290 miles straight to North Platte. The miles just ticked by, one dark stretch after another. But by 11:30 p.m., the fatigue didn't just creep in, it hit him like a ton of bricks. It was heavy, blinding, and totally sudden. His eyes burned, and his reflexes felt like they were submerged in water. He was still 80 miles away from his destination, which, is way too dangerous a distance to push through safely in an 18-wheeler, so Ray made the completely rational, safety-conscious decision to pull over at the very next truck stop he found. And, almost as if the highway itself had heard his request, at exactly 11:45 p.m., a sign emerged from the darkness.
The sign materialized right in his headlights, and it looked aggressively normal. We're not talking about some eerie, flickering billboard or a weathered wooden post here. It was a standard government-issue reflective green highway sign. The crisp white lettering caught his high beams perfectly, looking exactly like every other interstate sign in America. Exit 191, Millhaven Truck Stop and Diner, 24 hours, 0.4 miles. Ray didn't immediately recognize the name Millhaven, but hey, independent truck stops change hands and names all the time out in the middle of nowhere, right? He hit his right blinker, felt the familiar deceleration of his heavy rig, took the curving off-ramp, and headed up a quiet 2-lane access road.
The place he pulled into was the absolute epitome of ordinary. There was an illuminated gravel lots, a dozen massive sleeper cabs parked in neat rows, a buzzing red neon open sign in the window, and a standard fuel island. Ray fueled up his truck, sliding his company card into the reader before walking inside the diner to warm up. And the environment was just rich with sensory details. The low hum of slightly dirty fluorescent lighting overhead. Laminate tabletops sticky with years of use. A spinning, refrigerated glass display case holding these towering slices of pie. The permanent, comforting smell of bitter coffee and old bacon grease hung in the air. Inside, there was an older couple sharing a plate of fries in a corner booth, a guy in a worn flannel shirt, and a skinny trucker named Pete heading to Denver. A friendly, heavy-set waitress with a plastic name tag reading Carol walked right over and poured him a steaming mug of coffee. It was a completely mundane, hyper-real environment.
So Ray sat down at the heavy vinyl counter, nursing his mug. He struck up a casual, tired conversation with Pete about the treacherous, icy mountain passes waiting for them in Wyoming. He ordered a slice of warm apple pie, which, by the way, he said was genuinely excellent. Sweet, heavily spiced, perfectly flaky crust. When he was done, he pulled out his wallet to pay his bill. $8.50. He handed over the cash, left a crisp $5 bill on the counter as a tip for Carol, walked back out into the freezing November wind to his truck, and drove the rest of the way to North Platte without a single incident. The transaction was real, the taste of the pie was real, the entire interaction felt as solid as the steering wheel in his hands.
Okay, fast forward. 2 days later, the delivery in Reno is complete. Ray is empty, turned around, and heading back east through Nebraska. The highway is just as dark, the wind is just as biting, but this time, he has a specific destination in mind. He's actually looking forward to stopping at Millhaven again, thinking about another slice of that fantastic apple pie and a fresh pot of Carol's coffee. He's watching the dark highway, his eyes scanning the shoulder, just waiting for that reflective green sign to cut through the night.
He watches the green mile markers ticking down on the side of the road, 194, 193, 192. He lets his foot off the gas, slowing the massive truck down, signaling into the right lane, waiting for the familiar curve of the exit 191 off-ramp. He leans forward, squinting into the darkness, but the darkness just stretches on. The unbroken white line on the shoulder continues without interruption, and then a sign emerges, exit 190. There is no exit 191. The sign is gone. That two-lane access road is gone. It's nothing but endless, frozen prairie grass. At the time, he just assumes he blinked and missed it, making a mental note to look up the exact mile marker when he gets home.
But when Ray finally gets home to Omaha, he drops his bags and opens his laptop. He searches for the Millhaven truck stop. 0 results. Okay, so he broadens the search to literally any diner near that stretch of highway. Nothing. His confusion begins to curdle into this deep, creeping paranoia. He pulls up the official Nebraska Department of Transportation logs. He scrolls through the interstate data, and his stomach drops. Exits on I-80 in that sector go from 190 directly to 192. Exit 191 literally does not exist. Frantic now, Ray runs out to his truck. Keep in mind, this is a man who meticulously keeps every single scrap of paper for his taxes. He tears his cab apart. He empties his wallet. He finds his breakfast receipt from North Platte. He has his way station ticket from Cheyenne. But he has absolutely nothing from Millhaven.
But here's where it gets really crazy. Ray does have his own handwriting staring back at him, a physical, undeniable fuel log proving he pumped diesel into his rig that night. He had physically written it down in blue ink under the cab light, Millhaven, I-80, approx mile 191. He logged the exact mileage. He vividly remembers swiping his company card at the pump. But when he pulls his official bank records to check the corporate account, there is nothing. Guys, a massive commercial rig requires hundreds of dollars to fill its tanks. His truck ran for hours on that fuel after he left the diner, but the money never left his account. The transaction simply never happened. Which forces us to ask this profoundly disturbing question. Where was Ray Callahan that night? I mean, really think about it. If the truck stop doesn't exist, if the exit isn't recorded on any state or federal map, if the bank never charged him for the fuel that physically powered his engine down the highway, where did he pull off the road? What access road did his tires actually roll down?
Since that November night, Ray has driven that exact stretch of Interstate 80 30 times. He has pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, shining a massive spotlight into the fields, looking for old foundations, abandoned roads, just anything. He has never found a single trace. But at 3 a.m., staring at his bedroom ceiling, his grounded, hyper-practical mind absolutely betrays him. The torment of the memories just won't fade. They are too real. He remembers the specific taste of the cinnamon in the pie. He remembers the slightly crooked lettering on Carol's plastic name tag. He remembers Pete staring into his mug, stirring his coffee with a metal spoon, even though Pete drank it black. And he remembers the silence.
Because as Ray lies awake in the dark, running the memory back over and over like a broken piece of film, one final, horrifying detail clicks into place. While he sat at that heavy vinyl counter for nearly 45 minutes, he never once heard the diner door open or close. Not when he walked in from the cold, not when Pete left to get back on the road. There was no cheerful chime of a bell. There was no howling sound of the bitter winter wind from the highway outside. In fact, he's not sure anymore that the diner even had a door. If this journey into the terrifying unknown kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the unexplainable.
If you are ever driving alone on a pitch-black highway in the dead of night, and the hair on the back of your neck stands up, and something tells you to check your rearview mirror, don't. Seriously, don't look. Just keep your eyes on the road. Because sometimes the reflection staring back at you isn't a trick of the light. Sometimes passengers don't show up on your manifest.
All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly terrifying series of events known as the man in the rearview mirror. We're going to follow a 34-year-old guy named Danny Kowalski. Now, Danny wasn't a total rookie behind the wheel, but this was his very first solo long-haul run. And the timing, well, it's absolutely crucial here. It was early March of 2020, right when the whole world was shutting down. The highways were just eerily quiet. It felt like a ghost town out there.
Okay, let's dive into this timeline. So, departing Columbus at 4 a.m., a check-in at Elizabethtown around 9 a.m., first sighting at 11, a close encounter at 1:20 p.m., and finally arriving in Memphis at 3:30. On paper, it was a totally straightforward route, right? His uncle Frank threw his back out, so Danny had to make this urgent solo run, moving ventilator parts. Simple enough. But man, falling asleep at the wheel was going to be the absolute least of his worries.
To really grasp how terrifying this gets, you've got to put yourself right in Danny's shoes. It's the March 2020 shutdown, a 4 a.m. departure, thin, freezing rain, and a pitch-black highway. But the craziest part? He is completely alone in a day cab. If you don't know trucks, a day cab is tiny. There's no big sleeper section in the back, just the driver's seat, passenger seat, a tiny storage space with a curtain, and a wall. Basically, a claustrophobic little metal box hurtling through the dark. So the first few hours actually go incredibly well. Sun comes up, rain clears. He stops near Elizabethtown and calls his Uncle Frank. Danny tells him, hey, the drive is perfect, super easy. But Frank just says, it's always easy until it isn't. Danny kind of brushed it off as old man pessimism, But looking back, that was a huge red flag. Because the easy part? Yeah, that was completely over.
Moving right along to Section 2, a glimpse in the shadows, south of Bowling Green. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how our brains try to rationalize the impossible. Around 11 a.m., Danny casually glances up at his rearview mirror, and for just a fraction of a second, he sees a pale, indistinct face lurking deep in the shadows of the cab. He blinks, looks again, and boom, it's gone. Just his duffel bag. Danny does exactly what any of us would do, right? He blames the low morning sun, tells himself his tired eyes are playing tricks on him, and just keeps driving.
But 20 minutes later, that itch to check the mirror comes back. So he looks up, and this time it is absolutely not a trick of the light. The face is back. It's an older man, maybe 60 to 65, deeply lined face, short white hair, and the most terrifying part, neutral, unblinking eyes staring directly at his reflection. Not angry, not friendly, just dead eyes watching him. Danny lets out this choked yell, accidentally jerks the wheel, and literally almost runs his massive truck right off the highway shoulder. So panic fully takes over. He manages to pull off at a rural Kentucky exit, slams the truck into park, and checks the cab storage space, checks behind the duffel bag, and rips back the sleeper curtain. I mean, he's expecting to find a guy hiding in there, breathing in the dark. But nothing. The cab is completely empty. He is all alone. So, running on pure adrenaline, he chugs some coffee, tells himself he's just hallucinating from exhaustion, and forces himself back onto the road.
And that brings us to Section 3, the close encounter, approaching the Tennessee line. For 2 straight, agonizing hours, Danny refuses to look at that mirror. He's just using his side mirrors, staring straight ahead. But as he hits the Tennessee line, he just can't fight it anymore. He looks, and the man is there again, only now he was closer, leaning forward, pale hands resting on his knees, completely still, like he'd just been sitting there quietly for hours and decided to lean in for a closer look, not breathing, not shifting, just this cold, unnatural presence occupying the tiny space literally inches behind Danny's seat.
This is where the psychological horror just peaks. Instead of freaking out again, Danny's brain goes into this cold, glassy calm. Survival instinct kicks in. He physically tilts the mirror so it's aimed at the ceiling, refusing to look, and drives the rest of the way to Memphis like that. But then, look at the dock workers' reality. Danny gets to the dock at 3:30 p.m., begs them to search the truck in broad Memphis daylight, and they find absolutely nothing. Not a trace. They just gently tell him to get some sleep.
Which leads us to Section 4, the passenger's true identity, back in Columbus.
So Danny sleeps for 9 hours, picks up his return load, and drives 8 straight hours back to Ohio with that mirror still pointing at the ceiling. When he finally gets back to the yard, he unloads the whole crazy story to Uncle Frank. Frank just listens, totally quiet, and asks, "Did the face remind you of anyone?" And this brilliantly illustrates the real horror here, because Danny is forced to realize he looked kind of like Grandpa Kowalski, but Grandpa's been dead since I was 12. Frank doesn't even look surprised. He just nods. Frank then drops this massive bombshell. Grandpa Kowalski drove that exact same Columbus to Memphis route for 30 years, and it always claimed something rode with him. Listen to this. He called it his passenger, said it rode with him his whole career. He always said when he retired, it would need someone else to ride with. So that pale man, it wasn't just some random ghost. It was an entity that had sat behind his grandfather for decades. And now that Danny was driving that route alone, the passenger had finally claimed its new driver.
Danny is 38 now, right? Works regional day shifts, always home before dark. But he never points his mirror forward anymore. Never. He just refuses to know what might be sitting in the shadows right behind him, leaning forward, waiting. So I have to ask you, if you were alone on the highway and you saw the passenger staring back at you, what would you do? Pull over? Just look away? Let us know down in the comments. And hey, if you loved this explainer, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more. Drive safe out there and keep your eyes on the road ahead.